So as I sit down to record this, the date is September 1st, 2022. And so what that means is that tomorrow the UFC is going to make its long-awaited debut in none other than Paris, France. Now, it's actually been a very, very long and arduous journey to get MMA legalized in France so that events like this could actually happen here. And as it so happens that while tomorrow might be the first UFC event in Paris, it's not the first MMA event. And as a matter of fact, it's not even the first major pro MMA event. Bellator beat them there last year with a fight with Chuck Congo in the main event. And unfortunately for the record, Chuck Congo didn't end up winning that particular contest. It's kind of sad that the French people waited for that long just to see their guy lose in the main event. But tomorrow night, they could have a very different result because tomorrow night, UFC heavyweight #1 contender Ciryl Gane draws into the octagon against none other than Tai Tuivasa. And so there are a lot of people out there who, under ordinary circumstances, would have expected that Ciryl Gane would have been coming into this as the heavyweight champion of the world, and for good reason. I mean, of all the fighters active at heavyweight in the world right now, Ciryl Gane, in terms of all of the skills that he possesses, might very well be the single best heavyweight in the world right now. Now, as it turns out, that last year when the UFC UFC decided to have a fight to unify Ciryl Gane's interim heavyweight championship of the world. So remember that he was not the undisputed heavyweight champion, but he was the interim heavyweight champion. Francis Ngannou did something that not very many people actually expected, and he wound up coming up on top. And not only did he come out on top, but he actually came out on top because of his wrestling. Francis Ngannou out-wrestled Ciryl Gane. And while Ciryl Gane is arguably a better striker, I mean, in total, he doesn't seem to be a better boxer than Francis Ngannou, but adding the punches and the kicks, I think a lot of people would actually think that Ciryl Gane is a superior striker. But it actually did turn out to be a skill of Francis Ngannou's that was superior. Now wound up spoiling Ciryl Gane's, what everybody expected to be his meteoric rise to the top. I mean, everybody has to remember that at the time that they had that fight, Ciryl Gane, he was 15-0. He was supposed to be on an unstoppable shooting star to the top of the MMA world. But Francis Ngannou had different ideas. So now in his first fight back after losing his interim championship and failing to capture the undisputed heavyweight championship of the world, all of the pressure in this fight is on Ciryl Gane. Let's not pretend any differently. I mean, while a lot of people might expect that a hometown crowd, at least in a lot of different sports, would benefit the guy from that hometown, MMA is a different kind of beast in that regard. There's definitely, there's almost nothing there that suggests that, it isn't like, say, in hockey where, on your home ice, you have your bench on different sides of the ice at different times. It gives you an advantage when you're switching lines or anything like that. In MMA, there is actually nothing different for a hometown fighter than there is for anybody else. And so this idea of a hometown advantage, there's not really a whole lot there that would suggest that it's an advantage. And as a matter of fact, when you think about the amount of pressure that could be on a fighter to just not lose in front of their hometown, home city, home country, whatever you want to call it, you could probably actually make a pretty reasonable argument that there's significant disadvantage for a hometown fighter. But even more than that, when you look at the way that these two different fighters, and they have progressed in their careers, particularly over the last year, it becomes plainly obvious. Ciryl Gane, he might in his mind think that he has everything to gain, but really he has everything to lose in this. And Tai Tuivasa, he doesn't really have much of anything to lose. Because there is one important thing that only one of these fighters is coming into this fight with, and that is an illusion. Tai Tuivasa, as popular a fighter as he is, as exciting as he is to watch, as fun a character as he is, I don't think that he really has any sense in his mind. He doesn't really have that fear of of being revealed as an imposter. I mean, I think that everybody has a pretty good idea of exactly what and who Tai Tuivasa is. He is a competitor. He's a fighter. He's just a guy that goes into the octagon and he just bangs. Win or lose, he just goes and he swings life away, and either he knocks out the other guy or he's going to get knocked out. That's the way that Tai Tuivasa seems to expect a Tai Tuivasa fight to go. That's exactly what the fans expect. And so with that in mind, the stakes are so much higher for Ciryl Gane than they are for Tai Tuivasa. Because if Tai Tuivasa goes in there and loses, really all that he's done, the only thing that he will have done at that point, is he will do what a lot of people, might expect him to do. Personally, that's not what I expect out of Tai Tuivasa. But I think there's no shortage of people out there who probably expect him to lose this fight. But then again, you know what? There's a lot of people out there who expected him to lose his last fight as well. I think that pretty much everybody looking in on that, everybody who sat down to watch that Derek Lewis versus Tai Tuivasa fight, they knew that one way or the other, this fight was going to end in a knockout. But I don't think that very many people out there actually expected Tai Tuivasa, to go in there, knock out Derek Lewis, who had just a few months previous been the #1 contender for the heavyweight championship of the world, and basically jump the line. I think that Tai Tuivasa, if I remember correctly, he had only just managed to secure himself a top 15 ranking. And so they set up this fight with him and Derek Lewis. Nothing terribly special about it. I mean, just a fun fight. Like Chael Sonnen called it, it's just a fun fight. And he goes in there, and yes, it is a fun fight. But the guy that nobody expects to knock out the other guy goes in and knocks out the other guy and jumps the line. And suddenly, the guy that just busted into the top 15, suddenly he's securely in the top 5. I mean, I believe that, if I remember correctly, I think that fight basically jetted him right to #4 in the heavyweight rankings. And it honestly seems to me that the MMA world has not really yet come to terms with the detail that Tai Tuivasa was the guy that knocked out Derek Lewis. And here's how you know exactly that. In MMA matchmaking, there's a basic rule. I mean, you kind of bend it, twist it a little bit at times, but the way that it works is pretty much this: when you're doing your MMA matchmaking at your, if you're, in that role with your promotion, what you basically want to do is you want to match winners against winners, you match losers against losers. So guys who won their last fight, give them their next opponent who happened to have won their last fight. Guy who lost their last fight gets an opponent who lost their last fight. And that way, at least, you know that at least one of those two guys is going to break a losing streak. I think it's a pretty reasonable way to, basically a pretty reasonable basis in principle to do that. But now we have to take a look at this main event that we're going to have tomorrow. And suddenly this one detail jumps out, glaringly. Is that the guy who won his last fight, Tai Tuivasa, is being matched up against the guy that lost his last fight. So it's almost like in Sean Shelby's mind, when he was weighing these two options, it almost kind of feels like the expectation that Tai Tuivasa was not going to beat Derek Lewis was so high that Sean Shelby, in terms of his matchmaking, has basically treated him as if he didn't actually do it. And I think that a lot of people should be able to understand if Tai Tuivasa, if he was a little bit resentful about that. But it doesn't actually seem like it is. It doesn't at all seem like Tai Tuivasa cares. It seems like he doesn't give the first semblance of a fuck about that. And I think it's basically because it's because Tai Tuivasa never had any delusions to the opposite. I don't think that he sees himself any differently than the guy who just happened to go in and land the right punch. I don't think that Tai Tuivasa views that as a fluke, and by the way, I think that anybody else who does view that as a fluke is doing both of those fighters a severe disservice. Tai Tuivasa earned that win. He deserves to have that reflect better on his record than perhaps what the matchmaking suggests is being allowed to. Now, I think we should also take a moment to just recognize that it is something that could certainly work in Tai Tuivasa's favor. I mean, if he's not feeling any pressure, it just kind of gives him the freedom to just go in there and fight that fight exactly the way that he fought against Derek Lewis. But on the other hand, we have already seen, we've kind of already now seen what happens when you fight Ciryl Gane the way that Derek Lewis would. I mean, Ciryl Gane did have that interim heavyweight championship of the world for a reason. I mean, if you look at the reasons why they set up that interim championship fight in the first place, not necessarily, maybe not necessarily all the reasons for it were good. But when it came down to the fight that was actually in the octagon, he won that for a reason. He won that championship for a good reason. And on the other hand, being the guy that has all of the pressure on him, being the guy who has to go into that octagon tomorrow night and prove to the whole world that he was exactly who everybody thought that he was before he lost to Francis Ngannou, that's the kind of pressure that could definitely derail a fighter and distract him. But on the other hand, I mean, Ciryl Gane, all of those fantastic skills that he has, they didn't come from nowhere. And having lost to Francis Ngannou and having to now go in and prove that he is the fighter that everybody thought that he was, might have just motivated Ciryl Gane to improve those skills that much more and become that much more deadly. And in terms of a French fighter winning in a main event in Paris, arguably they are due for it.